Thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Brian Elaine, and I'm here today with Sheila Beckford and Michelle Letter. Their new book is Doing Anti-Racist Business, Dislodging and Dismantling Racism with the Four Reals from Chalice Press. You may remember the previous book, Anti-Racism for Reals, Real Talk with Real Strategies in Real Time for Real Change. Reverend Sheila M. Beckford, a Cradle Methodist, is an elder in the New York Annual Conference. Her deep roots in the life of the conference go back to her bake sales at Newman Memorial as a child, ushering, and page coordinator. Sheila has served on the District Committee on Ministries as a cluster leader in the Connecticut District, dance coordinator for the New York Annual Conference, and co-founder of New Day Church. Currently, Sheila serves as senior pastor of John Wesley United Methodist Church in Brooklyn. She also serves as chair of Black Methodists for Church Renewal, an organization that advocates for justice and the global connection, especially as it relates to Blacks and those of African diaspora. She also co-chairs New York Annual Conference Committee on Religion and Race. And she currently resides in Brooklyn with her daughter. Having been ordained in the 6th Episcopal District in Georgia, Reverend Michelle Letter is an itinerant elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Michelle serves on the ministerial staff at Metropolitan African Methodist Episcopal Church in Washington, D.C., and serves as the Director of Equity and Anti-Racism for the General Commission on Religion and Race for the United Methodist Church. Michelle is a PhD candidate at Emory University with a focus on homiletics. Her dissertation is entitled Preaching Truth, an anti-racism homiletic for 21st century white Christians that actually interrupts and dismantles racism. I should also mention that Sheila and Michelle contributed to Volume 2 of our How to Heal Our Divides book. You can learn more at antiracismforreals.com. That's antiracism and the number 4, REALS.com, and also at chalicepress.com. So Sheila and Michelle, welcome back, and many congratulations on your new book.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for having us.
Sure. It's my pleasure. I'm glad to get back together with you guys, and I'm really glad, to hear about the second book. But maybe before we get into that, each of you could tell us just a little bit more about yourself that I didn't talk about already.
Sure. You covered a lot of our history, and that's so we have been with our first book. We have been hired in many places to actually lead anti-racist workshops and consultings, and so our repertoire is building. And we have started our business, and it has started to really bloom. So we are just grateful for people like you, Brian, who gave us this opportunity to share the work that we are passionate about, and the work that we've been engaged in.
Excellent. That's great to hear.
Michelle? Yeah, Brian, you were actually the very first interview that we did with the first book. So wow. We feel like this is a wonderful way to introduce to many the second book as well. Just as Sheila was talking about, we've been working with different executive and leadership groups. We've been working with I think one of the groups started out being called a racial justice task force. And by the time the sessions were complete for that particular contract, they were the Racial Justice Ministry Band. They were a full ministry within their particular church. And we've also had the chance to talk with a lot of business owners and a lot of executive C-suite leaders who are interested in doing anti-racism work, but were concerned about the first book because we included our what we knew about how racism plays out in the church. And so we had some not only church examples, but we also had some church language in there. We were speaking to a wide audience, but that also included church folks, because part of our experiences also include church experiences. And what we realized was that sometimes the church language was actually getting in the way of those folks being able to use the anti-racism strategies, not necessarily because they couldn't recognize that they were powerful and that they would work, but that they were concerned that they couldn't get them through committee, or they couldn't get them through HR, or they couldn't get them through another place, because it was very difficult from the business lens to see church language and not see it as proselytizing.
Sure.
So we went to Chalice Press and we told them what was going on. And we said, hey, we've got this idea. What if we take the first book and we remove the church language and we remove the church examples and we highlight business examples and business work, and then we'll add to it. And so that's what we did. Chalice Press was really excited, jumped on board. The contract moved very quickly to get this book out. It was a very, very quick turnaround. And we're so excited to be able to talk about this book, not only the ways that they're similar, but also the new stuff that's in there too. So thank you, Brian, again.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was wondering how it came so quickly, honestly. After the first book, traditional publishing isn't known for its speed most of the time, but this one was really a great story. That's really wonderful to hear that you guys were able to kind of like, cross out of the quote unquote Christian book market into more of, a general purpose business book market.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So for those that are not familiar, maybe let's talk just a little bit about the first book and what the 4 reels are. Can you explain that a little bit to folks?
Right. So the 4 reels is basically our methodology of providing people with practical ways to eradicate racism and to become anti-racist. I always turn to Michelle and let Michelle just run down all 4 of them really quickly, because I take a little bit longer to run down each of them. So she's more concise with running them down. So I'll ask Michelle to run each of the for reals down.
Thank you. So this is probably the only time that I talk less. Usually I'm like blah blah blah. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. So real talk with real strategies in real time for real change. So the 4 reels are literal 4 reels. Real talk is usually made in comparison to more talk. More talk is just like the next meeting, the other thing, the more words without racism actually being interrupted and dismantled. So real talk uses the language that's necessary and does it in a way that's necessary so that anti-racism actually happens. Real strategies is pretty much what it sounds like. These are strategies you can use right now to interrupt and dismantle racism. And the book is filled with them, not only in every chapter, but in the end of the book, we have an appendix that's filled with individual real strategies that folks can use right now. Real time points to the reality that racism happens in real time, and so that anti-racism has to happen in real time. But there are times where we recognize something is wrong, something is inappropriate, something is racist, and don't have a particular strategy or something to be able to interrupt. So real time also includes real scripts and real role plays. And real time also reminds us that anti-racism and anti-racists do not replay the racism. We only role play the anti-racism. And then real change allows us to take stock of what is actually happening, right? It's one thing to say, oh, we did a bunch of stuff, but it's another thing to actually measure and take account for and have consequences for whether or not racism has actually been interrupted and dismantled. So real change has worksheets and to-do lists and templates and assessment sheets and analyzing whether or not racism has actually been dismantled.
Very cool. So, obviously the book is intended primarily for businesses. Are there particular types of businesses or sizes of businesses that you're targeting, or just across the board?
Just across the board. We believe that every business can benefit from this book. So we are not targeting any specific business. We feel that business is business, and all businesses should be anti-racist.
No question. So, how should companies use the book? I mean, is it intended to go along with the consulting work that you guys do, or is it, basically standalone?
It's a both and actually. A lot of what people tell us, businesses and otherwise, is that when they read our book, there are so many strategies packed into it that sometimes they'll read a strategy and realize, oh, wait a minute, this strategy is telling me that this is anti-racist, but I recognize that I or my business has been doing the thing that this is calling out. So sometimes it's just the book is a wake-up call to folks and to businesses that something they're doing is actually perpetuating, perpetrating racism. Some folks use it as a template to get started with an actual process. So let's say, for example, in this book, we have, how to have an anti-racist budget or how to start an anti-racist budget. So there are 10 prompts that folks can use to begin doing that work. Now, we have other folks that call us and contact us for training and executive leadership work because they get to a certain point and then they realize we don't know how to implement this part of this work, or we can recognize that we have racism going on over here, but we don't know how to implement this particular strategy that the book brings forward. So it's a both and. We've got folks coming in from entry points all over the place. They take it and run with it, or they end up calling us for executive leadership sessions so that they can implement them in ways that are anti-racist as well.
So in the book, you say to stop using the word diversity to minimize racial inequality, which I thought that was a great statement. I haven't heard that before. How do you see that playing out in the work that you've done?
How do we see that playing out? What?
In the work that you've done with companies, have you seen a shift?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's funny. In one of the companies that we were working with, they created this policy and then they sent it to us. And we reviewed the policy for, and we sent them back information or strikeouts or suggestions and recommendations. They took some of our recommendations and they didn't take some of our recommendations. But one of the recommendations that they did take, and everyone seemed to have been on board with, is not using the term diversity. Mm-hmm. And it was like we sent it, then we met with them the following month, was it, Michelle? Mm-hmm. We met with them the following month, and we were just so stunned at how quickly they found other words to use besides diversity.
Well, that's cool. Like I said, I hadn't heard that, substitution, directly portrayed like that, which, I think is great.
Sheila, would it be okay if I jumped in on that too a little bit? Mm-hmm. So one of the responses that we've gotten is, that's what we're trying to do. That's why the word diversity is there. Like, this is exactly what we're trying to do. Which, it's funny because I had this page flagged for our conversation together. I had this literal number 7 starred. So they will say, well, we are trying to minimize racialized inequity. That's why we're doing diversity work. That's the whole point of what we're doing. And so, and again, this points to what I was talking about before, that there are some groups that when reading these things, they'll realize, now, wait a minute, if they're saying that stopping this is actually anti-racist and we're doing this, then one of the things that we need is to learn what's wrong with that. What's wrong with using the word diversity? And then we can go into all the ways that the word diversity or the practices that come from just using the word diversity can also perpetrate racism. Mm-hmm.
So another thing you say in the book is that leadership positions don't miraculously create leaders with the know-how and skill sets to create racial equity. You guys have some great quotes. What are some of the skill sets that you describe in the book that you're helping people with?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Part of it is interrupting or breaking through what we talk about as the logic system of racism. So many times what we learn as business practices or even interpersonal skills or something like that is still locked within the logic system of racism, which means that even if the words quote unquote sound good or sound acceptable, they're actually still perpetrating racism. So part of our work with leaders is to illuminate where that language is, where those practices are. So one of the very first things for any leader who's considering doing work that is anti-racist and becoming anti-racist is to be open enough to realize that many of the things that they've been taught are also perpetrating racism. So if the openness isn't there from the very beginning, it's going to be very difficult to move forward in that way. Another thing is that there's a power change, a shift that happens, that the particular power structure, dynamic, whatever that happens to be in the current business model that they're using, if racism is still being perpetrated, it's being perpetrated through that power model. So not only being open to revisiting what folks have already learned as best business practices that stand on their own, but then also being open to seeing that some of these things are not going to make sense when they start, because we've been trained and taught to do things in a particular way. And so we've created a common sense model around those things. Anti-racism is not going to make sense in direct contact with systems that are perpetrating racism. So if that's the case, if that openness is there, once that happens, then we can start talking about all the very specific kinds of practices. How do you write a policy? How do you get the information? How do you know something is anti-racist? How would you even know? Once that openness is there, then we can go into the specifics.
So there's another definition from the book that I really like. It says, anti-racism is anything that actually interrupts and dismantles racism. I think of all the definitions I've heard, quite a few different ones of anti-racism, I think I like that the best. How did you all come up with that?
We just thought about what is anti-racism.
It is very logical.
Right.
But I haven't heard it before.
Many other definitions, it requires like this journey to get to anti-racist on these prerequisites to actually be anti-racist, or it's just a lot of requirements. And we were like, just those requirements are not necessary. It just needs to be anti-racist. So you have to disrupt it. You can't allow it to go on, because once you allow it to go on, it's no longer anti-racist. The racism has spread already. And so once you do the work that is anything that interrupts that momentum, then you can call it anti-racist.
So I think you mentioned a little bit about this, Michelle, but the book provides tracking modules and assessment measures, success and failure markers, strategies for making on-the-go shifts and avoiding common obstacles. So it sounds very practical. Can you say more about that?
Sure. Again, because it's just one book and there's only so much we can have within there. Really what we're trying to do is provide as many entry points for folks as possible. So for some folks that are trying to figure out for the first time explicitly how their business is going to be anti-racist or to build an anti-racist culture, assessment for them might be following a list. Because where do you start? You got to start somewhere. So for example, in the Real Change chapter, we have a list of anti-racism interview questions. Because what we found in talking with leaders and especially in folks in HR is that they're concerned about mentioning anything that has to do with race, racism, or anti-racism, because they feel like as soon as they open that door, they're going to be practicing discrimination, that they're going to have discrimination. So what we did was we created not only a description and a helpful kind of pathway to it, but we also created 10 questions that you can ask your candidates. This helps you not to interrogate race and not to interrogate racism. Really what you're doing is providing an opportunity for all candidates across the board who are going to be considered for positions in your organization to provide evidence that they are capable of doing anti-racism work. So if you're going to have an anti-racism ethos and culture in your organization, you have to have employees who are able to do anti-racism work. If you've got folks there who were not hired under that standard, they're going to have to be trained in order to do it. But when you're hiring new people, there are ways that you can ask them particular questions that help them talk about the anti-racism that they're prepared to do and that they've already done. And we help provide a template to help HR folks and business folks see the difference between discriminatory practices about race and racism and asking anti-racism questions.
That's really an important distinction. I'm sure it's very helpful.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, we think so.
So what else about the book would you like to share?
Well, we'd like to let you all know that the previous book, we had about 137 strategies listed. Mm-hmm. And we now have about maybe 43 additional strategies to help people to find their entry point. The book is very practical. It's an easy read. I will say it's not easy to do. And, switching from the logic system of racism to the logic system of anti-racism, we will never say it's easy because it deals with comfortability. So you're going to be uncomfortable because you're unlearning to relearn. And so at our age, right, as we get older, unlearning to relearn is often a difficult thing because all of our lives we have walked this path. All of our lives we have known, we have understood this language. And now it's a totally different language that you're being taught. And so you will be uncomfortable. So be prepared because we're challenging many of the things that even we learned as children growing up. It was a challenge for us. So it's definitely going to be a challenge for those who are just walking into this work, who's determined. And I'm going to say this isn't for everyone. We are not for everyone. We are for people who are willing to learn anti-racism work. We are for people who are willing to do the work. We are for people who are open to the new strategies and the new learnings that's in the book. Michelle?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. That's I'm thinking too that underlying all of this is our deep and true belief that every single person and every single business can do anti-racism work right now.
Yes.
The part that's often cut off from our quote is if they commit to do so. So it's yes, we're all capable of doing it. There is an anti-racist, anti-racism solution for every form of racism that's being perpetrated right now. It's whether or not we will commit to actually doing what is necessary in order to interrupt and dismantle it. So even when we say things like we're not for everybody, which is very, very true, we're also saying that should you commit to doing anti-racism work and be willing to stand up against the accountability and the consequences that must be part of this in order for anti-racist culture and ethos to be built and sustained, then every single person and every single business can be anti-racist. But it's going to be hard. And it's going to be hard in different ways, depending on the entry points that we're coming in. But if we're willing to do it, and we're willing to stand by that commitment when the things get difficult, when it gets hard, when it pushes right up against whatever thing we're holding on to that perpetrates racism, then anti-racism will go forward.
Amen. So, looking forward, are there any future books or future projects or extensions on this project that you'd like to share with people?
We do have some ideas swirling around. We do want one thing that's on my heart is to have a children's book, a book that allows children to, again, do things practically. You know, we need to start with our children. If we start with our children, then we'll have people will have a better understanding of racism. Children actually lead adults. If we look at how children interact with one another, if we listen to how children speak to one another, we are so impressed with our children that we tend to end up following them in some ways because they remind us of who we are to be. And so that's in my heart to produce and publish a children's book with our same method.
Sure. Well, one of the things that I started when I was doing Writing for Your Life was a children's book conference, and this would fit right into that. So I hope that comes to fruition.
Me too. How about you, Michelle?
Well, the other thing that we'd like to share too is that we're working on a couple of large scale grants right now that we're looking to create some pilot programs for scalability. So a lot of what we've ended up doing are even when we do, perhaps like it's a keynote or major workshops for conferences or things like that, it's still been, with one organization that is organizing the whole thing. That we're working on how one focuses on communicating anti-racism without perpetrating more racism, and different formats of doing that. And then another is focused on what we call racial positionality, that we can be doing work across lines of racial difference when we do anti-racism work, but there's part of that work that's going to be different, and part of that work that's going to happen in racialized caucuses. So we're working on those two grants. And then we have a couple of other projects that are really in the very kind of beginning, bubbling brainstorming sessions. But we'll be sure to let you know when they come to fruition.
Yes, please do. So again, the title of the new book is Doing Anti-Racist Business, Dislodging and Dismantling Racism with the 4 Reals. You can learn more about it again at antiracism4reals.com or chalicepress.com. And I really give Chalice, a great thank you for helping, birth these books. And thank you, Sheila and Michelle, for joining us and for doing all the work that you do. It's really great to see the progress and the continued effort that has been expanding and looks like it will expand some more. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the support, Brian. We really appreciate it.
My
Absolutely.
pleasure.